So welcome everyone. This is February of 2024 because people will be watching this later too. This is the alternating host series on Wednesday mornings, and Dr. David Fawcett is on today, and his new book is finally released. He had written Less Men and Meth, which is for a particular meth and gay men and I was one of the fan club, but going, you've got to do a more comprehensive book, across, all forms of chemicals, because the interactions, and particularly how it's co-occurring often with sex and porn, is really important, and nobody's talking about it. And there's no more expert than Dr. David to talk about it. So he's here, and he's got a copy of his book, and he's going to, talk about that a bit today. And I will put a link. You can order the book, as well, if that is something that could be beneficial for you. So I'm going to mute myself because my phone has been ringing off the hook this morning, but I'm going to turn it over to you, and please do show your new book, and I will put the link in the chat. But Dr. David Fawcett, so if you don't know him, yes, author, he collaborates with Seeking Integrity. I'm in the super Dr. David fan club. So
thank you, Tammy. It's a pleasure to be here. And obviously I've worked with Dr. Rob to help put together some of the chemsex influence in the Seeking Integrity program. So I'm very much attached to Seeking Integrity, obviously. And in fact, Seeking Integrity is the publisher of this book. So I think it's a really proud thing. So let me hold up this cover. This is called Sex Under the Influence, Understanding and Healing from Sexualized Drug Use. And Tammy perfectly set it up. It is really the large view look at how sex and substances interact in a kind of a ritualized way once they become part of the same addictive process. And my first book, as she mentioned, was really looking at men who have sex with men and amphetamines. This is really looking at everybody, because we found, and increasingly so, by the way, it's one of the things I want to make a point of today, is to talk about how we're seeing these lines really get blurred. So like at Seeking Integrity, we've had a number of heterosexual men who've been heterosexual their lives. They get involved with sex and porn addiction. They kind of escalate into some drugs. And if they get in certain kinds of drugs like amphetamines, suddenly they're doing all the same behaviors I would see all my gay guys doing. They're sleeping with men. They're sleeping with transgender people. They're sleeping with women. They're doing all kinds of stuff they never thought they would do. And it's a real phenomenon. And what we have found is that therapists really across the country are ill-equipped to deal with this, because I think as part of our training, we're trained for mental health, or we're trained for substance abuse counseling, or we're trained for sex addiction counseling, but oftentimes those things don't overlap, but they do in our clients. And so I think this is a really important book, and I've tried to make it kind of from soup to nuts, if you will, with looking at how these two different addictive substances and behaviors go together, and what kind of recovery strategies we have to have, because they're different. One, I think by the time someone gets to this point, really the only solution for the substance part of it is abstinence. I think we can do a great deal of harm to our clients to kind of negotiate a harm reduction thing. Once they're, like, for example, if I have a meth user, it's really hard to negotiate, let's, cut back from slamming or injecting to, smoking or snorting, and let's do it, only once a week. That's not how that kind of drug works. And so I think really the only safe way is abstinence. But obviously abstinence isn't the solution, as we know, for sex addiction, right? We have to figure out how do I reintegrate sex back into my life so I can do it in a way that's pleasurable, and also in a way that's not addictive, and in a way that's not going to relapse. Because the classic pattern, once these two things, sex and drugs, get merged together, is that I give up sex totally for a while. I get my abstinence together. Maybe I'm holding it together for 3 months, or even shorter, a month, 3 months, 6 months sometimes. But as soon as I try to bring sex back into it, I relapse, because I haven't developed any skills to help deal with sex in the face of all these abuse triggers, substance abuse triggers. So that was the whole point of this book. And I'm really proud of it. It took a long time, longer than I'd hoped, but it really covers, as I mentioned, this idea of putting together these addictions. What do they have in common? Looking at the addiction cycle. And sometimes, by the way, I'll get asked, well, if we're like a non-addicted couple and we have a glass of wine before having sex, is that, sexualized drug use? I don't want to talk about that in terms, or chemsex. No, it's not. It doesn't, the definition is not anytime you combine sex and substances. It's when we start to combine them in what I call into my addictive ritual. So I may, you know, we happen to say we have a porn addict who really gets in the mood by smoking a lot of cannabis. And suddenly, if he does that enough, that cannabis creates a physiological response. It creates a headspace that kind of sets the mood for the porn, right? And that can be, you can substitute sex for that. I remember at Seeking Integrity, we had a client who was a meth user and a porn addict, and he was a caretaker for his elderly mother. He lived in the basement. She lived upstairs, and he was a good son. He took care of her all day long and didn't dare get high. As soon as she went to bed, though, which is early, he went down to the basement, fired up his pipe and started getting high on methamphetamine and looking at porn, all night long, basically. And as we know, what happens with porn addicts, it escalated. He escalated into some illegal territory. The FBI knocked on his door, took his equipment, horrifying thing that occurs. But he had all this meth in the basement, but didn't dare look at porn. He had no electronics anymore anyway. He said, well, at least I can smoke my meth. And he went down and actually tried to get high in the meth. And he got sort of high, but not what he wanted, right? Because at that point in his addiction, he required both sides. He required the addiction to substances and the porn. And that's what we find. So how do we sort of disentangle that with these different recovery strategies? So the book really looks at how these things come together. The book, more importantly, too, there's a whole chapter on different populations, because when you look at addiction research, most addiction research is on men. Most addiction research is on white men or college students. And so when we look at, for example, women or transgender populations, I did a great deal of research before on men who have sex with men. So that's actually fairly well studied. But say for women, we know that women's bodies react differently to common drugs. And they may have a heightened response to cannabis, for example, or a lessened response to opioids. There's all kinds of differences. So we look at that both epidemiologically and physically. How do these drugs affect different populations, and how do they merge together? Same thing, I cover a love and romance addiction in here as part of that cycle of addictive push and pull for people. And so that's for the first half of the book. The entire second half of the book, I'm really pleased to say, is basically all recovery strategies and skills. So we look at everything, and this is a lot of what I've learned in the last 10 years, working with the team of Seeking Integrity, just getting more training, but different ways of what that early phase looks like, with a detox phase, a stabilization phase. What kind of psychiatric complications are there? One of the things we're seeing now that's different than, if I dare say, the good old days with methamphetamine, right? 20 years ago, when meth was, home brewed with a lot of Sudafed tablets out in the outhouse or the barn or whatever. Now the cartels are making it, and it's pharmaceutical grade. It's very pure. And so what we're doing, we're seeing a lot of meth users become psychotic and really paranoid, and it's not going away when they stop using the drug. And so we're having all these other psychiatric complications that are really really problematic for people. So dealing with that, dealing with a lot of techniques of a lot of trauma, I think, underlies addiction. So there's, of course, trauma therapies once people are stabilized, but there's also things we as therapists can do in the meantime, like breathing techniques, 4-7-8 breathing, being aware of breathing, being aware of calming responses, being aware, connecting with one's body, looking at negative core beliefs. There's a lot of things we can do, and it really covers each of those in step. And then finally, longer term, I have found a lot of substance abuse counselors are just clueless about the sex piece. And so very often, and I hear this from both clients, and I heard it from therapists too, well, just get clean and sober and the sex will take care of itself, right? We know, anybody who's a CSAT knows that that's not going to happen, right? The sex has now become an addiction in and of itself, and porn or whatever clusters around that. So we have to address that directly. And so the book covers what is familiar to most of us as a circle plan, right? And some of those strategies and what to do about that, and which is like totally, it's like a news flash to most people who are substance abuse counselors. So it's really a comprehensive book. It's an easy read. I've sent it out to blurbs. Really pleased to. I should have sent them to you. We could have read some, Kenny. But people like Ken Adams and Deb Kaplan and Stephanie's reviewing it now, and there's really phenomenal reviews I'm getting back. So I'm really pleased to say that. And I think this book definitely fills a gap that people don't. It's going to be a resource for both our clients and ourselves, frankly. So I'm really hoping it does get received well. So far, so good. It's getting well received. But I'm really excited to bring this into the world because I think it's much needed.
I know it's much needed. I was on the, like I said, on the, like, this needs to be more than just meth. Like, I have some questions, because, and yes, I agree. Like, I say this all the time, with people that go off to substance programs, like, abstinence is like, just stop that. And then, and then there's this perception that things will just magically all get better. And you said sometimes the sex has become, the problem. And I often also see that sex was the initial problem, and then it got paired with chemicals or whatever, but like the primary is honestly sex addiction, and then the chemicals have become part of us. And sure, stopping the problematic substance use, but yes, and one of the things that we are uniquely qualified at Seeking Integrity to address that co-occurring holistic, and people have gaming or gambling or whatever, there's others, food, and so we're looking across all of those things, because hanging on to certain things, and you and I have talked about this. There's no smoking or vaping at Seeking Integrity, and there's a reason, because otherwise that's keeping that dopamine going. So if we're not looking at all of this, and you're just stopping one thing, and I think how frustrating for people who, I've gone to my substance program, and I'm feeling really good because I'm clean, and then I get out, and just like you're talking about, like, I go, have sex, and the next thing I know, I've relapsed, and they're like, how did all that crash and burn, so quickly? So it's not only a disservice, but the loss of hope, for some people. I'm always grateful when they still pick up the phone and call, and
Oh
are
yeah.
looking, for other resources. You talked about the meth being more pure, and that was interesting to me, because I'm suspecting that you mean a higher grade, but I also hear that it's mixed with all of this other stuff, like that it's, like you don't know what you're really getting. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, that's thank you for that clarification, because just a little bit of history here. In 2005, when the beginning of the current very bad meth epidemic, the federal government passed the Combat Methamphetamine Act, which basically limited how much Sudafed you could buy in the drugstore. So any of us take Sudafed, you have to go to the pharmacy counter. You can only buy one pack. You have to show your driver's license. It's the database. So overnight it wiped out the supply of the precursor chemical needed to make methamphetamine. And so, but the demand never went away. Just like all our drug policies, right? We shut off the supply, but people still want it. We never addressed that. So the cartel stepped in, and they took an old manufacturing process. The meth has been around for over 100 years. They kind of cleaned one up and built these factories in Mexico, and they ship liquid meth into this country by the 55-gallon drumload, just over and over again. So what's coming in, and the meth piece is actually very pure. The meth itself, it's like pharmaceutical grade. What happens to it, though, is that it gets adulterated, like most recently and problematically with fentanyl, but it can be have all kinds of other things too. And so, yeah, it's a really good point, Tim, because what we're seeing is the meth overdose rates, fatal overdose rates, are almost doubling every year. And that's largely due to the fentanyl in there, not the methamphetamine itself. So, but the quality of the meth is pure, but it's all mixed with all kinds of other crap as well. And so that's the problem there. And the other thing too that I deal with a little bit in here is that there's these whole class of drugs called NPSs, novel psychoactive substances, there's basically the kind of clinical term for all these chemicals that are made in labs around the world, sometimes in people's basements, sometimes in industrial plants, and literally North Korea, China. These kind of places you wouldn't really want to get your drugs from. They're available on the dark web. They're bought, they purchased, and people arrive. And so sometimes they just have chemical names. Right now in Europe, for example, we're seeing this thing called 4-MMC, which that's the name, and it's very similar to methamphetamine. People think it's again, how we rationalize as addicts, right? They're saying, well, this is my harm reduction method. It's not as dangerous as methamphetamine. Well, who knows, right? It's not tested. It's you're getting something. Who knows even what you're getting? And so I think we're seeing all these chemicals, and it's just scary because it's expanding tremendously. This is related actually to a resource in the book. One of the appendices, it says drugs and behaviors of concern for the recovering addict. And I think this is just such a resource, because we talk about alcohol and sex, but also attention deficit disorder medications, right? Which are very problematic for a lot of sex and porn addicts and amphetamine addicts, because they are amphetamines, benzodiazepines, caffeine, exercise, extreme sports, cocaine. GHB, injection drug use, ecstasy, marijuana, medication-assisted therapy, which is a really useful thing, but we need to take it into account if we have somebody who's a sex and drug addict. Nicotine, those MPS inhibitors, testosterone, anabolic steroids. So it really is comprehensive in looking at how are these things all related to my client's problem, and how might they really set back the ability for that person to get better. Before I forget to, I just want to mention this term sexualized drug use. It's maybe new to some people. It has become in the last couple of years the standard term for this combination of sex and drugs. We're seeing it, and that's what's in the literature. If you do research, that's the term that we start to see. And it's really drug use. It says what it is, right? Drug use in a sexual context. And as Tammy said, it doesn't necessarily have to start with drug use and go to sex. It often starts with a sexual behavior, sex addiction that expands. How many of our clients, male clients, for example, have started to get some drugs from escorts, right? That's one of the main services, right? We have a lot of clients who started using cocaine and then methamphetamine as a direct result of seeing sex workers. And so it definitely can come the other way. And just one other thing too, that this gets subtle, because I'm thinking a number of our clients who will say, okay, I have a problem with meth and cocaine and sex and porn, right? But I don't have a problem with alcohol. Alcohol's not my problem. But when we talk about it, and this is why it's so important, I think, for us to look at rituals, like what comes first, what kicked this whole thing off? And a lot of the time, more than half the time, these guys will realize, oh yeah, I did have a beer or a drink, just one or even maybe two, and that's all. That's the only alcohol I had. But every time I do that, it disinhibits me. I start getting into other stuff. I start looking at porn. It sets this whole thing into a cascade of trouble. And so what an easy solution, just avoid that first drink, among other things. But I think, so oftentimes our clients will try to bargain with us, what, alcohol's not my problem, meth is my problem. Well, alcohol is going to get you back to meth very directly. And so I think that's we can get in power struggles with people because they don't want to give that up, just like they don't want to give up certain sexual behaviors. But if they take an honest appraisal of how those behaviors and those drugs have impacted and what they've resulted in, usually that gets clarified. But
while you're on the topic, please elaborate on smoking and vaping, because that's really, we get some pushback from clients coming in that how could that be part of my issue, and why do I have to stop that? So can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, sure. And I think I really commend Seeking Integrity, because they're one of the few programs that ask clients not to use nicotine when they come in. And I remember over the years working in different units where they would have they had literally a cage, and people would come down in their breaks and everybody was like stuffed in the cage smoking like 5 cigarettes at once. It was really pretty disgusting sight. And as an ex-smoker myself, I understand that. But the thing about nicotine is that, first of all, just in terms of the amount of dopamine nicotine releases more dopamine than an orgasm, right? So it's a very strong mood-changing chemical. And so that's first off the bat, right? That's also, it speaks to why it's so hard to give up. But the problem is, with the way nicotine works in the brain, it's actually metabolized twice in the system. So it's almost double the power that you would think it has, even though it's more powerful than an orgasm. But what that does, it really leaves the limbic system, this addictive center of our brain, in kind of addictive mode. It's like our brain never really shuts off from expecting something else. It's in a state of constant expecting when we're smoking like that, because we're in an addictive cycle. And anybody who's a smoker can know you get really strong urges, and you get cranky and upset and sweat if you don't get it. So your body's in a physical withdrawal. So it's a very powerful drug. And I think if we allow people to continue that while they're asking them to give up everything else, it's really doing a disservice, because the brain is never really kind of drying out, if you will, from that addictive process. So people complain about it to some extent, but I think in the long run, people who do it really notice the difference when they give up the nicotine. At least my experience with Seeking Integrity clients, because it's a distinct difference. And so I think that's one really important thing. And also, by the way, people will sometimes say, well, I'm going to give up my porn, I'm giving my sex, I'll give up my amphetamines, but I don't want to give up that, right? That bargaining thing that we do. And if I'm going to bargain about something, I'd bargain about something else besides nicotine. That's really a bad one to keep in the game, because it's just doesn't end well.
Yeah,
Frankly.
well, and I know, and like been there, done that. It's like there was an Adam Ant song, "Goody Two Shoes," and I felt like after I got sober, I was like, I've become Goody Two Shoes, and like and of course a little resentful about like
Right.
so yeah, I was like, I don't want to be that good, so to speak. And the more I'm was around, I was like, yeah, why would I want to do any of those things? The 12 steps. Scott and I did a webinar last week about the 12 steps, and why would I want to hang on to any of that old behavior that's going to keep me chained and shackled to those thoughts. But I get that it's a process. I do want to ask you too, because I was kind of shocked to hear that the psychoses doesn't necessarily go away. I mean, is that like, are you finding that's a more permanent, or does it abate after a longer period of time, or, tell me more.
Yeah, and this is something that we're just starting to research now, because it's a phenomenon just in the last couple of years. But just anecdotally, and seeing clients and talking to people in meetings, 20 years ago, it was very common for somebody to get psychotic using methamphetamine and get really paranoid. And that paranoia is the hallmark of meth psychosis, right? People are following. I had clients a month into recovery, like looking at my AC vents for cameras and microphones
Oh,
and all that
wow.
stuff, right? It was
Yeah.
typical. But it would almost always resolve. It would go away after, a month or so. Right now we're seeing semi-permanent psychosis, really disturbing. I was talking to a friend of mine, a young man who did well, and then he relapsed recently, and he's now sober. He's in a halfway house, 90 days, getting drug checked. But at 90 days, he's still, when he is like, when things are quiet and the um, air or heat or AC is coming out of the vent, he'll start to hear voices in the vent, and they're
Mm,
talking, and it's not just voice, they're talking to him. It's really kind of freaky stuff. And to the point where he's on an antipsychotic medication,
mm.
which has helped it. And that seems to be sort of semi-permanent for people. His psychiatrist told him, hopefully within 6 months, now he's already 90 days sober, within 6 months he can get off it. So it takes a while to straighten this out. Now, there's also some variability. If somebody is, predisposed to a thought disorder or some other thing, then that the risk is greater, than this will never go away, because you're really messing with your brain and your brain's ability to detect reality, and it's kind of impaired. But it's really the strength of the drug is so strong that it's really impacting this in a big way. And also, I talked to a guy in New York who's an interventionist who is trying to adapt a way to deal with people in psychosis, which is hard, right? Because
Hmm.
they're going to kill themselves and they need treatment somehow, but they're reluctant to go. And so he's trying to walk this fine line between not, joining them in their psychosis, but kind of encouraging them. Well, gee, and we've had clients seeking integrity too, who had these psychotic experiences, and they want vindication, right? They want people to really understand, this is really what happened to me. My family did this. They put microphones in, they put wires in the walls, and I have proof. And which probably isn't there, but the point of this interventionist, what he tries to do is say, well, if you really want people to believe you, you really have to get sober, and then talk from that point of view, right? And so any angle at all to get through, but it's really becoming a problem getting people into treatment, because they're less trusting, more concerned, they don't know who to believe, and it's really a problematic thing for a lot of meth users these days.
But I've been hearing that with cannabis too, that people are having psychotic breaks, with that. So while we're talking about psychosis, please, share more on that too.
Yeah, and this is another thing. I had lunch with my old college roommate a couple of weeks ago, and back in the dorm, we would smoke marijuana occasionally, and we were just joking because it was all like basically sticks, and it was like just such crap, right? I don't think we ever really got high. But the cannabis today, on the other hand, has been bred and crossbred and strained and refined, and it has very, very powerful psychotic properties. And so we are seeing. I spoke with a woman running a treatment center the other day, mostly adolescents and young adults, and she's seeing all these people who are coming in with cannabis psychosis in very, very scary and damaged and need inpatient treatment for a long time because of cannabis. And that's a real problem, and that's becoming more and more common. It's a very strong drug these days, not the same drug that we had before. And by the way, cannabis, and part of the problem, and Tammy, you and I have talked about this before, there's this, the kind of sense of dangerousness has kind of gone away as more states legalize it, and it's medical marijuana. And, I live in Florida, and everybody's grandma's taking gummies, go to sleep at night. So it's everywhere. And so we think, well, it's not so bad. For the adolescent developing brain, it's extremely dangerous. And that's, of course, one of the main groups that use this drug. It's far more harmful than it is for adults. So in adults, it's not a piece of cake either. So it's a problem. But that psychosis thing is a big deal. And I think, again, the substance abuse field has kind of gotten caught short. We don't know quite what to do with that because this is something we've never seen before and don't know quite how to treat. So we're just finding our way now. And in fact, honestly, the problem is just being talked about and recognized now. I think it's something people kept seeing this over and over again among their clients using cannabis who were psychotic, and everybody thought, well, this is just a fluke. This is just a one-off. And it's becoming more and more common. So yeah, it's a very dangerous phenomenon.
Well, and we've talked before too, but like, yes, everything has escalated. Like, beer back in the olden days, when I was, imbibing, so to speak. That sounds so, no, when I was absolutely in my full blown addiction, like the percentage of alcohol was so much lower. I mean, even a craft beer now has like 2 or 2.5 times as much alcohol, percentage. So, we talk about all this stuff and we kind of make it sound like alcohol, is a problem, but not so much. And I'm like, the guys that come into treatment that are, really using alcohol, they're the ones that I'm often scared the most for, and may end up in detox because of the damage. So I do feel like as a society, and I don't want to get into these generalizations, but I feel like we kind of go, oh, it's just pot, oh, it's just alcohol, it's not that big of a deal, and we're missing all of this stuff that's happening. I read something the other day, and I can't remember what drug I was going to earmark it so I could ask you about it, but I was like, I haven't even heard of this, and it's now becoming, kind of an epidemic. And I'm like, it feels like there are more, these chemically created, drugs that are being created faster, and they're so potent and lethal, and they're getting out into the mainstream, really quickly. And like you just said, we can't catch up. Like, the government can't catch up. The providers can't catch up. I don't know.
Right.
If you're a single practitioner therapist, how you can keep up, with all of this stuff. So it's really challenging, to be able to address this, with authenticity.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you sent me that drug. I'd never heard of it either the other
Oh,
day. And
I did send it
yesterday
to
I
you.
saw
So
on,
yeah,
pink cocaine. I mean, there's all these new
yeah.
things that are basically these chemical formulations, those novel psychoactive substances. But to touch on the alcohol for a minute, though, the other way I think we're seeing that increasingly dangerous is with energy drinks, right? We see all this
Oh yeah, yeah.
huge amounts of caffeine and alcohol, to kind of mellow it out. It's like somebody using GHB and methamphetamine, I guess, to try to find that perfect high. Really dangerous stuff, though, because it's considered, well, it's just an energy drink. Well, no, it's not. It has all these powerful, not just amphetamines in it, but alcohol and other kind of mood changing drugs. So these are problematic, and they're flavored, and they're designed to really appeal to younger people, I think, for the most part too. So I just want to say too, to your point about alcohol, I think, of course, this is all hypothetical, but I do believe if alcohol were to be like invented today, it probably would never ever be approved
I
because
I agree. Yeah.
it's one of the more dangerous drugs out there. Frankly, people can die, and the detox is fatal. It can be. So ruins your brain, ruins your liver. People die of it all the time, and so it's a dangerous drug. But it's because it's legal and it's common. I think we really misjudge the lethality and the dangerousness of it. A really powerful one, and for disinhibiting. From a sexual point of view too, alcohol is a pretty terrible drug for sex because you can get sloppy, you can't focus. Where men can't get erections, no men or women can't have orgasms necessarily. But what does it do? It disinhibits, and that's why people love that drug, because it kind of gets them out of themselves and all their worries and fears and all that. So people use it for very specific reasons, although it's not necessarily a good drug for sex. It's certainly not a good drug for your health.
Yeah, well, but it's so easily accessible. And I have wondered, yeah, I have thought that, but then when cannabis was legal, has been more legalized in more states too, I go, I don't even know, because it felt like with that there was just this, oh, it's only pot, and everybody's, what can be the danger? And then it, like, now we're going, oh wait, there's dangers and things like that. But now, I mean, you're never gonna, like alcohol, you're not going to be able to pull that back and go, oh, we should change the rules on that. It won't happen. Once something becomes, legalized and permitted,
Right.
it doesn't happen. So
Right.
there is a question. I'm almost 29 years clean off meth and alcohol, but I use sex as a substitute. 20 months ago, I realized I was only sober, but not in recovery. I was devastated. Doing the work of recovery has changed my life 100%. Thank you for addressing this. And I agree. And, I say this all the time, and we have, and good for you, honestly, for getting off the substances. But yeah, it's like anything you're hanging on to. And again, why, running off to a substance program and not addressing, I use this example all the time, that I'm eating a chocolate cake every night, like that's a problem. If I'm just on my phone gaming, nonstop, that's a problem. Like, if we're not looking across all of that, then guess what? We're just addressing we're taking one of the symptoms away, but we're not addressing holistically the underlying issues, so that somebody's really, as we use in 12-step, happy, joyous, and free, which is the goal, to be congruent, to not have compartmentalization. So good for you for, being willing to do the work and looking, across those things, and doing the deeper work. I mean, that's what it really ends up being is, if we're just substituting one thing for another, we call it the whack-a-mole of like, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
I'm done with that one. And I also call it trash can, addict, which is not as nice,
Right.
but it's like, okay, I'm if I can't get to, if I can't get to the sex worker, I'm going to, use alcohol. If I can't, use alcohol because, I've got to, work or something like that. Well, I can use porn, and it's just like whatever it is, that can keep,
Right.
Even like the smoking and vaping, you talk about, that I did not know that, kind of doubles in your system, like that there's a second. I didn't know that. So I always learn
Yeah.
something more from you. But that problematic, and people go, and I remember, when I first started in 12-step meetings, they were smoking meetings, and thank goodness I quit smoking before I quit, the other things, because otherwise I don't, like, that would have been really hard to, to stop. But like I would reek of smoke, from sitting in I'm trying to get healthy, and I'm trying to do the right thing, and I'm sitting there going,
Like
you know,
blue. Me
yes,
too.
yeah, yeah. So,
Me too.
so so I'm grateful, that, that I was, able to stay off that. I have enough problems, I had to deal with
Right.
multiple things, but I want to be happy, joyous, and free.
And so many people, and this is where I get angry that the field is doing a disservice to clients. I mean, how many clients have we had at Seeking Integrity that came from very well-known and very reputable substance abuse programs, right? Who do a good job of substance abuse, but they totally are blind to sex, porn, chocolate cake, all the nicotine, all this other stuff. And so the addiction is very much alive and well in these people. We've had guys come with 6 and 7 years clean, bless their hearts, trying to hang on to
Hmm.
that in the midst of all this other addictive behavior in their lives, porn and sex and
Hmm.
escorts and
Hmm.
food and gambling and gaming. And so I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. Unless we really look at all those things, because they're just different ways. And we know this now from brain scans. And I'll talk a little bit about this in the book too. One of my interests is kind of neurobiology, and it's other people don't find it as interesting, so I made it an appendix.
There you
The
go.
book is very readable, but some of the stuff is in there. But yeah, but we have to. All these things are ways of just producing the same brain response. If we look at that's the brain of somebody using cocaine with an fMRI scan, and we look at somebody looking at porn, it's the same, right? It's just different buttons to push to get the same result. And so I think, but our training, if I'm a traditional substance abuse counselor, I'm not trained to really look at that. I'm not trained to do a thorough sex history, and also I'm not trained to go into maybe some uncomfortable areas. How many times have we been in a substance use group, not a sex addiction group, or someone where people are trained with sex therapy or CSATs, but somebody just standard substance abuse counselors who something will come up and the therapist themselves gets uncomfortable. Oh, I don't want to really push that. I'm uncomfortable asking that question. I'm uncomfortable talking about this sexual behavior, and they don't go there. And so the whole thing kind of gets bogged down and doesn't get addressed. So that's why I think this combination of recognizing both sides of that addiction equation, whether it's substances or behaviors, and pulling them together and understand it's the same addiction, it's the same addiction ritual, the same person doing both, is just really an essential piece. Because frankly, and we've been sober a long time, Tammy, I think I was pretty much a straight alcoholic. I think maybe you were too, to the most. Anyway, you don't see many straight alcoholics these days, right? Almost everybody is doing a combination of different things. And so
Oh,
I
I
think
had a
it's really
combination.
it's
I
on
just
us.
like
Okay.
the other substances I was using were, you know, were on the light side compared to what there is now. But yeah, and I've shared this before, so I'm not, and I don't care. But I struggled with an eating disorder, and that actually, so aligns with, and that's why you probably chocolate cake all the time is like, like the eating disorder is a behavioral, and you can't just stop that like you do the chemicals. But that absolutely, I know for sure, because I remember thinking this is just as good as the chemicals, so it was working for me, in its own way, and and was hard to stop because that was a whole secret thing too. So I had to do a lot of work, but man, like I've got decades sober in that as well, and that
Yeah.
that was really important to me. There was so much shame around that, and to I'm gonna tear up to get the healing in that area too. But you're right, I go to meetings now, and it's rare, like if I'm in an AA meeting, it's like, you talk about alcohol, and I'm like, oh my gosh, if we're only talking about that, we're missing things. And like to your
Right.
point, Dr. Rob does a presentation. One of my favorites that he does, with other professionals, is talking about if you're not asking these questions, and it is about sexual behavior. Therapists don't want to
So
talk about
important.
sex or money, and those two things are key to to looking at all of this. And unfortunately, and I'm not bashing other programs, I'm just saying the typical model for a substance use disorder program is the revolving door. We're going to get you abstinent, we're going to send you out, and then if you have a relapse, come back, and I say all the time to our clients, or people that are looking at us, if we're not your first treatment program, we sure want to be your last. We want to give you the tools that will carry through across all of the problematic behaviors, so you really can have freedom from this and not just be switching to something else, and to have the support to be able to be successful with it. So it's not an easy journey, we know that, but man, oh man, to be on the other side of that and have, I love that our program is called Seeking Integrity. We strive for that personally, and we want to help other people have that. And you can't if you're compartmentalized like that person shared, like I had this recovery, and so like I'm going to meetings and I'm saying yes, I'm sober, but I have this whole secret life yet, and we want people to be able to be congruent and be one person, not these shadows of other people. So
Absolutely. And that takes time, right? This is not a quick fix. And I mentioned the last half of the book. It's really looking at three different stages of recovery, but up to multiple years. What do we do? We're building on stuff, right? I think the substance abuse treatment center model you kind of talked about, that's so common, like you detox them, give them 3 weeks, or if they can get that, and ship them out until they come back again. And so they're constantly bouncing around that first initial phase. And recovery takes a lot more than that. But it really first off, it takes recognizing, okay, where are all these different addictive behaviors in my life? And some of them we want to give up, some we don't. And sometimes we can see them, sometimes we can't. But really helping, and this is where our role as therapists, I think, can really be helpful in helping people see how these things are. Listen, in my life, interesting. I was in denial about my alcohol, so I gave up smoking a year before I got sober, thinking that's the real problem. Of course, it wasn't. But so when I finally got an AA, I picked up cigarettes again, thinking, screw that, I need something. But I have my first anniversary, I quit, thank God. But as we start to see, okay, if I'm not really doing my primary substance or behavior, what second one, is almost as good that I can plug in. And so you'll start to see all these people gain weight, people get in debt, people have all kinds of problems. They switch to other things. So yeah, it's a problem until we recognize that compulsive behavior and that we're running as addicts, we're running from feelings and the reality sometimes and truth, and because we
Mm-hmm.
don't want to feel it until we
Mm-hmm.
have the ability and the skills to deal with that, we're going to really be in trouble, in jeopardy. And I think you and I are both these people. I was talking at a meeting last night about, I can think of a guy who is go to a lot of the meetings I go to. He's more than 20 years sober, and he's just the angriest, most
Mm-hmm.
unhappy person I've ever seen. And so he's dry, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's not really working a program, and I'm sure he has other addictive behaviors that he's not even talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I go to an AA meeting, half the people are on their phones and they're looking at porn and or online, and it's like it's unrecognized and it's kind of socially acceptable sometimes in certain recovery cultures. So I think it's a problem for people.
Yeah, it is. And, but if you're in an AA meeting and they're saying, just talk about the alcohol, like it doesn't even give it. I love 12 step. I really love it. But it's one of the things where, you know, I remember talking to Dr. Carnes at one point, and we were talking about if we went to all the 12 step meetings that we needed to go to, because trust me, I could be addicted to everything, except smoking. But anyway, um, we would have no time because we would be going to all these different meetings, and so it would be fantastic if there was, a more overarching, 12-step meeting where you are free to talk about every form of, problematic compulsive behavior. Now, do we apply the 12 steps to everything? And yes, there are certain things, and I think it's really important, like we're talking about, if you are struggling with sex and porn addiction, to go to meetings, because those meetings are specifically for that. People do not talk about their sexual acting out, even though it's interesting to me when people have been sober from chemicals, and I'm like, well, the fourth step, a whole big chunk of doing the fourth step is talk about your sexual your sexual problems. It's in the AA big book abundantly, but I think people gloss over that, minimize that, or sponsors don't know what to do. I don't know all of the the insides of that, but it's like, if we were searching and fearless in our 4 step, we would be going, oh wait, this could be an issue too, and what do I need to do?
Exactly.
But in an S group, that is the safe place. And so, since we're talking about co-occurring, Dr. David on Tuesday nights has a men's chemsex drop-in group, and that is for anybody, any male who has co-occurring chemical and sex porn addiction, issues. So it is, gay, straight, doesn't matter. That is, a safe place for the guys to talk about all of those things, those co-occurring behaviors. In a safe place. Again, not 12-step. This is, our drop-in groups are not 12-step, but all hosted by someone to create a safe space.
I might add too, we've had a couple of requests and we've allowed it for women to come in. So
Oh, you have? I did not know
yeah,
that.
and it's been fine. There's a woman from South Africa and a couple other
Oh,
people. It's quite an international group. But yeah, so interestingly, we've been doing the group, I don't know, 4 years or something. And over that time, it started out almost exclusively gay. And now it's about half and half straight, half gay, all with the same problem of meth, sex, all that
mm,
combination. So it really is a growing problem for everybody. And I don't want to exclude, because there's so few resources for women. That really became clear to me doing this book. And the guys are comfortable as long as the woman is comfortable. And so far, that's been the case. I don't want to exclude anybody, because
okay.
this is a
I
place.
will make a note, because I think it says just men. So, but I'm gonna double
Okay,
check.
we can, yeah, take that restriction off. And we did run it
Okay.
by kind of a group conscious thing, and everybody's fine with it.
Okay.
Um, but I think and the importance of that group is, you're exactly right, is that we can talk about everything, because a lot of those people have the experience of, they go to NA or AA or CMA, and they don't hear about sex in those meetings. The S meetings don't hear about drug use, and so you're kind of caught without a place to talk about the whole experience from a holistic point of view. And so and of course we keep it, clinical and not triggering as best we can, obviously. But that's an important place to speak safely about that. And there's a need for that. People just don't have a spot to talk about those things. That's
Yeah,
really important.
yeah, and I appreciate that you have a safe space, and I don't know how, to change things in the 12-step, programs, to make it different. There are certain meetings that are a little looser where you can, kind of generalize, but I for sure, I've been going to, for example, my AA meetings, nobody's talking about their sexual acting out. Like they may gloss over, but yeah, I used to, but they're not talking about, like, hey, I'm struggling with these issues. So it would not be a safe place to bring it up, so it's challenging. And again, if you start going to like, well, I need to go to 6 different 12-step meetings, how do you pick, where even to start? So
I do sometimes guys that are these chemsex users, meth, cocaine, and sex and porn combinations, they're really reluctant to identify as a sex addict, and I just try to kind of
interesting.
skirt that because like it's another label, another pathology, something else is wrong with me, and also I think it's a way of like avoiding maybe having to deal with compulsive sexual behavior in general. But the way I kind of do that, and this can be helpful for anybody, is just talk, well, let's not get into labels. Let's just look at the behavior. Your behavior looks just like a sex addict, whether you want to call it that or not. And there's tools for that, right? There's tools in these meetings to help you with that. I think most substance users have no idea what a circle plan is. Most substance use therapists don't know what a circle plan is. And that's, I think, an essential tool for the sexual piece, right? Again, it's not abstinence we want, it's how do we bring this back into our lives in a safe way. So there's tools and resources in those meetings, I think, that are very useful. And I think, frankly, I recommend both. Pick a fellowship one so we can both address both sides of the equation in your recovery, the substance and the sex, in a healthy way, because there's different tools that are really absolutely necessary. But I do find people hesitate for the label. They're self-conscious of that.
Yeah, and I hear that too. And like, there's more shame around that. And at the end of the day, like like you said, the behaviors identified. To me, having the term addict, it was like, well, thank goodness there's actually a reason why I'm doing this insane stuff. Like, because otherwise there was no good reason, and I was either crazy, to keep doing the same things that were causing me problems. And I was getting, like, it was just, I would have died from my addiction. But I didn't know until I did. But I do, and I don't see it as, I guess it could be pathologizing. I guess, I just take oh my goodness, there's help. That's what I see is if I have a term for this, then I can get the help that I need, to address these things. It's like, anything else. If I don't know what it is, I don't know, how to, exactly. to handle it. But I do think, yes, if you're going like, if I just stop the chemicals, then, and I want to keep that intense, sexual acting out or whatever, I need to, hang on to something. But like you said, if you're going to your sex worker and you're getting, drugs, guess what, like I hear that all the time of like that you relapse on the chemicals, because of the sexual acting out behaviors, it happens.
And speaking of addiction, and we've had this talk before too. I remember a couple of years ago, I was invited to give a talk in Canada, and the host that invited me warned me, said, the term addiction or addict is considered very stigmatizing. We don't use that term because it's shameful for people. And I kind of talked around it a bit while I was in Canada, but I think it's really important to name this is an addiction, right? And yeah, it's shocking maybe, and I guess it could be shameful, but honestly, to your point, Tammy, it's just this is the problem and there are solutions, right? If we don't name the problem, we're going to kind of dance around an effective solution. So throughout this book, we use the term addict and addiction a lot, and whether it's referring to sex or substances, but I think it's really important to name it. This is addiction, and it's a problem. And yeah, some people maybe don't want to hear it, but that doesn't change the reality that this is a thing that we need to address in our lives.
And I do that too when I'm talking to people, and I say I'm gonna own that I'm gonna use the term addict, and if it like please substitute whatever word. But like I don't know anybody that goes, yes, I have a substance use disorder. So yes, it sounds nicer, but like I don't know anybody in real life that uses that kind of terminology, even though it softens it. So but I watched an interesting uh, piece on, autism, the other day. And it was like these people were not feeling pathologized. They were like going, this is who I am, and I'm taking the necessary steps that I need to be safe in this world. Like, whether it's, sensory things or whatever,
Mhm.
but rather than looking at any of this stuff as shameful, like just going, we are all like, I don't know a single person who is like 100%, like has zero wrong on, like there's everything is perfect, with them. And that, so if we don't own all of the, pieces of us, then we're not attending to ourselves even. And so to me, it just seems like if we just go, hey, yeah, this is one of the aspects that I deal with, and here's the tools that I'm using that are helpful, great. And if I share those with other people and they're meaningful, great, but as with everything, it's take what you need and leave the rest. But
And as a therapist, you can explore that, right? There's a lot of shame at this term. Well, let's talk about shame, because
mm-hmm.
shame is a core feature of addiction, especially sex addicts. So to really talk about that and look at that and see how is that showing up in their life and where does that come from? And that can be actually very useful material for therapeutic stuff too. But people have to be willing to talk about it.
Yeah, yeah, and that's true with all of this stuff, and I hear, and I know for partners that this is challenging too, to to feel the magnitude of what their loved one is struggling with, and some of them are working on a recovery path, and some of them are not. So I mean, I get that, and I know that that can be really challenging for for partners as well, and even to have the label be applied to their loved one, can be difficult. So, and so label or no label, but if we're looking at the behaviors, it's like, well, these are all problematic behaviors and hurtful to you, and here are tools that could be helpful, in moving away from those things. So
Yeah, even Dr. Rob has said this, and I totally agree with it, that addicts basically have an intimacy disorder, right? And they don't know how to do that intimacy very well. And by that, I mean just being vulnerable, learning how to trust people, all that, those things that are essential skills for a relationship. But I think these addictions, from a partner's point of view, too, are really interfering with the intimacy, right? The potential for intimacy. And in fact, I found a lot of the guys I work with who are getting recovery really have to learn those intimacy skills from scratch, right? It's like somehow, myself included, until I got in recovery, I kind of missed that lesson in life. I'm not sure what happened to it, but so I think ultimately talking about these addictive problems really is tremendously healing, not just for the addict, but for the partner, for the relationship, for everybody involved, because it really is addressing things that either have gone off the rails or that never existed in the first place. And so it's a way to build and heal such a profound way that I think is really beautiful. If people can get to that point, be willing to look at the
yeah.
hard stuff and do the work.
Yeah, and intimacy disorder, and yes, we talk about it with sex and porn addiction, but it's across all the addictions, just like you said. It does not matter what form of addiction. If we're using behaviors or substances to numb out and escape, we are not connected in a real and meaningful way. And I think often of like the compartmentalized life, and how we have all these little silos of here's this problematic behavior, and here's my family, and and I hear partners going, did he or she ever really love me and all that, and I'm like, yes, you're in this silo over here, but then there's also this other little silo over here. And so in recovery, if we're really we're congruent with ourselves, and then we're able to connect in a real and meaningful way with other people, and not have a facade of well, I look good over here, but don't look over here, so that's what real intimacy is. And I know lots of people reach out to us and they're asking about, we aren't intimate, and I'm like, you're talking about sex, and I'm telling you, sex addicts prove all the time that they can have sex without any kind of intimacy. So what you really are looking for is that connection, that vulnerability, and how do you achieve that? So
Absolutely. And to bring it back to this topic of sexualized drug use too, that's where in recovery it's so tempting for, say, a recovering sex addict to use a little wine or a glass of wine or two to loosen up, right? To try to get things going. And that's the there's pitfalls here. Again, wine may not be, problematic, but for some people it will be. And I think just to really look at it, and anything that we're doing, behavior or substance, to kind of facilitate getting connected or drop through our inhibitions or feel less uncomfortable, all those are signs that we really need to maybe learn how to sit in the discomfort a little bit, learn skills, and get through to the other side, which we can do. It's just we don't choose to, right? It's easy to take a pill or to do a behavior or to check out whatever we do that's not healthy. So it's really important.
Well, and you've talked about like sensate, focus, touch, and like there are tools to use that are a starting place. So again, it isn't like you have to figure all this stuff out yourself. That we have so many resources that'll help give you ideas to explore with your partner, like have a conversation about this, what a concept, because that usually doesn't happen. It's like I'm trying to figure out what what do I need to do, and it's like, no, like have the conversation here, have like start in a different place, but fear comes to mind. So
fear, shame,
mhm.
just these are skills. They're really just skills that take practice. Okay,
Mhm.
active listening, communication skills. There's different things that make a tremendous difference in people's lives, but they got to be willing to learn them and practice. And there's a learning curve, right? It's not always in sobriety, if we're trying to rekindle some intimacy, it's not always going to be smooth, right? Or it's going to be
Life
awkward
isn't
and
smooth.
uncomfortable. Exactly. And kind of embrace it, I guess, and go with the flow. Sometimes it's funny or whatever, but I think just we hesitate from actively engaging in life. And that's I think the real key is in recovery, is just to go for it and have the skills and allow ourselves to be supported by each other and by our support systems. It's really important.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to get a copy of the book. But like I am super excited about that. There's so much to learn, and I know that you teaching therapists how to do this work, better, is going to be valuable for people. For those of you that joined us today, I'm grateful for you showing up. Dr. Yes, Sex Under the Influence is the book, and I put the link in the chat so that you can order it. And he's going to be doing a podcast with Dr. Rob, so that will be on Sex, Love, and Addiction podcast soon too. So stay tuned. Dr. David will be back on the even months. Kristin Snowden will be here next month, and next week is Dr. Eddie Caparucci. So keep coming back. We'll keep having resources for you. Thanks, Dr. David.
Thanks, Tammy. It's great to see you.
You too. Bye-bye.